Breaking news! Los Angeles Rams fans got quite a scare in the last few hours. I'll explain more about that in today's video. We're also going to talk about Puka Nacua and his unexpected early exit. We'll cover more details from the joint practice against the Cowboys. Basically, we have a lot to discuss. Before we start, make sure you've hit that like button, but only do it if you've been a Rams fan since the 70s. There are people here who were at those early games. It's amazing to see you all still healthy and following the Rams. Much respect. Now, if you can, write down how many years you've been a Los Angeles Rams fan, and add this at the end. Go Rams! Together until the end. The Los Angeles Rams finally held their first joint practice of 2026 against the Dallas Cowboys, and if you followed everything on social media, you probably got the impression that it was a terrible day for the Rams offense. However, the full picture seems much more complex than that. Dallas certainly had its big moments, especially on defense, but the Rams had theirs too. And there are several important developments we need to discuss, starting with the situation involving Puka Nacua. Puka left practice early, accompanied by Rams athletic trainer Reggie Scott. This immediately caught everyone's attention, because whenever one of the team's biggest stars leaves the field before practice ends, Rams fans naturally wonder what happened. At this moment, however, the information coming out of practice gives us no reason to assume the worst. Sean McVay said he saw Puka leave, but didn't know exactly what had happened. Even more importantly, Matthew Stafford didn't seem particularly worried when asked about the situation. Stafford said he didn't know exactly what had occurred either, but no one came running to him in a panic, and there didn't seem to be an atmosphere of alarm within the team. That doesn't give us a diagnosis, of course. We simply don't know exactly why Puka left early based on the information available here, so there is no reason to turn uncertainty into something worse than what has actually been reported. And before leaving, Puka apparently looked like Puka. McVay said he thought Puka played phenomenally during the joint practice. There was one play that Dallas cornerback Shaven Revel broke up on a fade intended for Nacua, but that shouldn't overshadow what Puka was doing throughout the rest of the session. He continued making plays and looking like his usual self until he left. So for now, the important thing is simply to monitor what happens next. There was another injury situation worth watching, this time involving Myles Garrett. Garrett did not participate in the joint practice as the Rams continued managing his left knee. The issue was described as swelling in that knee, something he had apparently been dealing with over the previous couple of weeks. McVay described Garrett as being around 85%, and considering this was a practice rather than a regular season game, there wasn't much reason to push one of the team's biggest stars unnecessarily. The Rams had an opportunity to see what the rest of their defense could do against another team without Garrett on the field, and one player took advantage of that opportunity in a major way. Byron Young had himself a day. With Garrett unavailable, Young became one of the biggest stories on the Rams' defense. He consistently caused problems for Cowboys offensive tackle Terrence Steele and made life difficult for the Dallas offense. That's exactly the kind of performance you want to see when a major player is missing. Someone else has to take advantage of the extra opportunity, and Young apparently did exactly that. The Rams' pass rush had several strong moments, but the secondary got involved too. Quentin Lake intercepted Dak Prescott during red zone work, giving the defense one of its biggest plays of the entire practice. When you're working in the red zone, the margin for error becomes smaller, and taking the football away from Prescott in that situation is exactly the kind of play this defense wants to produce. Nate Landman was another name that continued appearing in reports from practice. He was described as flying around the field and making plays, particularly as part of a Rams run defense that had a strong showing. So even without Garrett participating, there was a lot to like about what the Rams defense accomplished. But we also have to give Dallas credit. Their defense came ready to play. The Rams had trouble running the football at different points during practice. Blake Corum and Kieran Williams were both reportedly stopped for losses in the backfield on multiple occasions, and Dallas was also able to create pressure against the Rams quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford, Stetson Bennett, and Ty Simpson all took reps, and the Cowboys' defensive front found ways to get after them. That naturally brings attention to the Rams' offensive line. This may not have been the cleanest practice we've seen from that group, particularly in pass protection. Dallas produced multiple sacks, and Donovan Ezeruaku was among the Cowboys players credited with getting home. There was also a play where Warren McClendon reportedly got driven backward badly. But there's another detail that matters when evaluating what happened up front. The Rams were rotating offensive tackles. David Quessenberry and Keegan Trost were brought into the first-team offensive line at left tackle and right tackle, respectively, at different points during practice. That meant those players weren't simply being protected against backups, they were getting opportunities against Dallas's first-team defense. That is a serious test. And during training camp, that's exactly what these practices are supposed to provide. Sean McVay gets an opportunity to put players into uncomfortable situations and see how they respond against opponents who haven't spent every day practicing against them. So when we hear about sacks and pressure, the context matters. We don't have enough information from the material here to assign every pressure or sack to a specific offensive lineman. We know McClendon had trouble on one particular play, but beyond that, there isn't enough detail to responsibly say exactly who was responsible for every breakdown. There was also positive feedback about the offensive line. Stafford specifically praised the work up front and highlighted Steve Avila and Kevin Dotson, particularly regarding the running game. And that leads us into what might be the biggest misunderstanding surrounding this entire practice. If you only followed the first wave of reports coming from the Dallas side, you might have thought the Rams offense couldn't do anything. That wasn't the complete story. Dallas absolutely made plays. Nobody needs to pretend otherwise. Their defense created sacks, stopped runs, and forced turnovers. But the Rams offense moved the football and made plays too. Stafford threw one interception to Justin Barron, and McVay acknowledged that Stafford was a little late on the throw over the middle. But McVay was otherwise very positive about his quarterback. His assessment was simple. He thought Stafford was great. McVay praised Stafford for keeping the ball in play and seeing the coverage well, while essentially identifying that interception as the quarterback's major mistake of the day. That's very different from the picture you might get by simply seeing that Dallas intercepted Stafford and generated pressure. One mistake does not define an entire practice. And Stafford wasn't simply throwing everything outside to his star receivers either. One of the more interesting developments was how involved the tight ends and running backs were in the passing game. Kieran Williams contributed as a receiver. Colby Parkinson emerged early as one of Stafford's preferred options, while the offense was feeling out the Dallas defense and taking some shorter completions. Tyler Higbee made plays. Terrence Ferguson got involved as well and reportedly reached the end zone. That is something worth remembering because an offense becomes much harder to defend when the quarterback isn't relying on one or two targets. Puka made plays before leaving practice, but Stafford was also using the other weapons around him. There were contributions coming from different areas of the offense, which paints a much more balanced picture than simply saying Dallas dominated everything. And Dallas linebacker Justin Barron deserves credit for what he accomplished. Barron finished the day with 3 interceptions. One came against Stafford, while the other 2 came against Stetson Bennett. 3 interceptions in a joint practice is going to get attention, and it should. But again, Stafford's interception needs to be viewed alongside McVay's assessment of the rest of his performance. According to McVay, Stafford otherwise had a strong day. That is why joint practice reports can be tricky. One reporter might be watching the defensive line. Another might be focused on the secondary. Somebody else may be standing on another field watching a completely different period. Then everything hits social media at the same time, and suddenly people are trying to decide who won practice based on individual plays. The more reasonable conclusion from the information we have is that both defenses had plenty to celebrate. Dallas's defense caused legitimate problems for the Rams. The Rams' defense caused legitimate problems for Dallas. And both offenses still found opportunities to make plays. For Los Angeles, that's valuable because this is exactly why you practice against another team. Your own defense sees your offense constantly. Players learn tendencies. They recognize formations. They understand what their teammates like to do. Then another team arrives, and suddenly everything changes. Different players, different techniques, different pressure packages, different coverage looks. That's where you learn something. And speaking of learning, one of the most exciting stories from this practice came from Ty Simpson. Simpson appears to have made a strong impression during his opportunities against Dallas. One play in particular stood out. During red zone work, Simpson connected with Mario Williams for a touchdown in the back of the end zone. The throw was described as a lofted pass delivered off his back foot. That's the kind of play that gets people excited about seeing a young quarterback in actual preseason action. Simpson reportedly entered for a drive beginning around midfield and also received a red zone opportunity. He wasn't simply standing around watching Stafford and Bennett take every meaningful rep. He got opportunities, and according to the reports referenced here, he took advantage of them. That makes the upcoming preseason opportunity against the Kansas City Chiefs much more interesting. Based on what McVay has said about the quarterback rotation, Simpson appears positioned to receive significant playing time. Exactly how the snaps will ultimately be divided between Simpson, Bennett, and Matthew Caldwell isn't completely settled from the information we have, but Simpson is expected to play and could see extensive action. And that's what Rams fans should want. Practice performances are encouraging, but eventually we need to see what a young quarterback does when the game moves faster and everything becomes less controlled. Can he handle pressure? Can he make the right decision after the first read isn't there? Can he protect the football? Can he respond after a bad play? Can he take the things he's learning in practice and carry them into a game? Those are the questions that preseason football can begin answering. And the fact that Simpson made plays against a Dallas defense that also gave the Rams' first-team offense legitimate problems makes his performance even more interesting. This wasn't a day where the Cowboys' defense simply rolled over. They pressured quarterbacks. They created interceptions. They stopped runs behind the line of scrimmage. And Simpson still found a way to produce a red zone touchdown to Mario Williams. That's a positive step. The same can be said about Byron Young on the other side. Garrett wasn't available, and Young responded by becoming one of the biggest defensive stories of practice. Those are exactly the moments coaches need during training camp. Stars are obviously important, but a championship-level roster cannot depend on every superstar being available for every snap. Someone else has to be capable of stepping forward. Young did that. Lake created a turnover against Prescott. Landman was active. The Rams' defense gave its coaches plenty to evaluate. And on offense, despite some ugly moments against Dallas's pressure, there were encouraging signs, too. Stafford made one mistake that McVay clearly acknowledged, but the head coach still came away praising his overall performance. Parkinson, Higbee, Ferguson, and Williams were involved in the passing game. Puka was playing well before leaving early. The offensive line received some positive feedback in the running game, even while dealing with problems in pass protection. So, no, this wasn't a perfect Rams practice. Dallas won plenty of battles. Their defense deserves credit for that. But this also wasn't the disaster that some of the early reaction might have made it seem. Now I want to hear from Rams fans. What stood out the most to you from this joint practice? Are you more focused on Puka Nacua leaving early, Byron Young stepping up without Myles Garrett, the pressure Dallas created against the offensive line, or Ty Simpson making another strong case for himself? And after hearing the full picture from practice, are you concerned about this Rams offense, or do you see this as exactly the kind of difficult August test the team needed? Let me know what you think, because this first battle with Dallas gave us a lot to talk about, and what happens next could tell us even more about where this Rams team is heading.